Mountain, goes into Cabin Creek. Ohio. The Ohio goes into the Mississippi. The Mississippi comes to you all. And I left from West Virginia to come here, and I bet you it beat me here because it took me 2 days to drive. I bet you this water beat me. And this is not just one place in West Virginia. 500 mountains have been destroyed. If you put all of the land together in West Virginia that's been destroyed from mountaintop mining, it would make a path from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, California, 0.8 of a mile wide. West Virginia is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. Not the most, but one of the most. And in a given acre of land, you will find 1,000 distinct species of life visible to the naked eye. 1.5 million living things in an acre of land. And when they do mountaintop mining, they destroy all of it. Because they strip the topsoil, they push all of the rock and rubble into the surrounding valleys. They have buried 2,000 miles of headwaters of streams and rivers in West Virginia alone. 2,000 miles, that's nearly coast to coast. And a lot of the water that's produced in West Virginia goes to the entire eastern seaboard. So what happens to West Virginia water happens to all of us. And we are not Las Vegas, so what happens in West Virginia doesn't stay in West Virginia. It's coming soon to a water supply near you. Our government has failed us miserably, and we as a nation have failed ourselves because we have idly sat back and hoped that the government would do the right thing. And we can't afford to wait for the government to do the right thing. 3/4 of the water in West Virginia is not safe to swim in. That means, of course, that you can't eat the fish from that water. You can't drink that water. You wouldn't bathe your children in that water. And I certainly am ashamed that the water that's being produced in the beautiful mountains of my home is now polluting everything downriver from it. And this has been going on for over 100 years. All of these issues are so incredibly important, all of them. And all of us have a voice, and all of us have a gift, and all of us have some place in this giant thing called life to offer of ourselves. I was really, really fortunate to spend several years of my life on a Lakota reservation in South Dakota. I think we have some guests from there. Just want to honor you. The elder that I spent time with told me that the Lakota people believe that of all the things a person might accumulate in their life, that's all we have to offer our communities is our contribution to me, because it's helped me along the way. My house in the middle of the night and fired a gun into the sun. It's helped me when people have stood in front of me with guns and knives and fists and ball bats and threatened. And it's helped the people of our communities to understand that this is what we have, and we have to share that gift of our own lives. We can't sit back and wait for. And I want to just close with saying that I often speak to college students and high school students who come to CAFR to understand what's happening there. And a lot of times the question is, hey, Paul Corbett, how come you care so much about saving the earth? And I always say, I don't care about saving the earth. She is older, wiser, smarter, far more creative, and infinitely more patient than I am. She's been through 5 mass extinctions that fossil records indicate, and she will get through this one too. She's just going to do it without us because of our ingratitude for all the gifts that she gives us every day, particularly the water and the air we breathe. So let's please remember that these struggles that we share, while they may be different on the surface, they all come to the same place, and it's about trying to preserve something very sacred that's been given to us. Thank you.
Hi, how's everyone doing? My name is Josh Fox. I'm the director of Gaslight Part 1 and Gaslight Part 2, and a new film called How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, which will be out tonight. All right, I was clapping for the film. She's in the film. So the good job. Anyway, so tonight the film's on at 7 o'clock. I think it's 7 o'clock, right? Hopefully, doors open at 6. Okay, well, hopefully you all can be there. I started reporting on and making films about fracking in 2008 when the oil and gas industry came to my doorstep in Pennsylvania in the upper Delaware River Basin, which is about a mile from the New York border. Didn't think that was going to be much more than a community project, something I was doing for my friends and neighbors, something that I was making to educate the people immediately around me about what I was learning about fracking. 3 movies, an Oscar nomination, Emmys, all that, and 50 million viewers later, I'm still working on it. And the reason why I'm still working on it is because of the people who are involved in this and how incredible the community is of activism that has surrounded the work that I've been doing from day one. From meeting my neighbors, who I didn't know very well, in the beginning of that conversation about fracking. It is apparent that there is no recourse that you have except for the people around you and your community. And it is the strength of the community that ends up being the test of, it's a test for all of us, And I think that what we're trying to do right now is enlarge that space and make sure that we have a greater sense of power and a greater community around us. New York State banned fracking last year. That was a result of thousands and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people coming together through probably what was about 150 to 200 individual mom and pop anti-fracking environmental groups that happen around somebody's kitchen table. Not the paid environmental structure that we know of with Sierra Club and NRDC and all of that, but the people who came together around their kitchen table every Sunday afternoon and discussed what they could do next. And the Gasland films grew out of that. They grew out of a dialogue with those groups all across America, from Pennsylvania to Wyoming to West Virginia to New Mexico to New York, California to Louisiana, and everywhere in between. And what we're doing right now is we're continuing that grassroots tradition in touring the films to the places that are mobilizing against the fossil fuel industry. So why we were in Abita Springs yesterday? Because you guys are fighting fracking. The week before that, we were in New York fighting a pipeline called the Constitution Pipeline. And we were in Massachusetts fighting a pipeline called the Ned Pipeline. Before that, we were in Westchester fighting a pipeline called the AIM Pipeline. There are pipelines, power plants, compressor stations, offshore drilling, mountaintop removal, tar sands development. The fossil fuel industry is expanding at the very moment when we know that we have to stop consuming oil and gas, that we have to move in a totally different direction. So what we're doing is advising communities on how to develop renewable energy, town by town, place by place, connecting activists who are fighting the fossil fuel industry, whether that's a pipeline or a power plant or a compressor station or fracking field, about how to move towards 100% renewable energy. This is absolutely crucial. Campaigning to go back to the time before oil and gas, I think that would be impossible with the number of people that we have on the planet. We are, however, campaigning for a ban, obviously, on that is by developing renewable energy. The only way we do that is by replacing with renewable energy companies, wind companies, solar companies, geothermal companies, hydroelectric companies that amass hydroelectric power and sell it through the grid, to go ahead and make fossil fuels obsolete. So all the things climate can't change. Fighting fossil age, and say, here's the film. We think this is going to make a difference in terms of how you're connected to the rest of the world, and also to provide crucial resources where we are connecting town and community and grassroots leaders with leaders in the renewable energy field, and connecting individuals at our screenings with ways that they personally can take their home or their car or their lifestyle and move that into a 100% renewable energy. the film is about climate change. So it covers all these aspects, from frack gas to tar sands to offshore drilling. And you know, in 2010, right after Gasland came out, our first day off was July 1st, 2010. And we came here. We said, we've got to figure out how to take good quality footage of what's happening in the Gulf. So we were, you know, already almost 2 months in, or 3 months in, to the catastrophe, because it lasted about 4 months. And I think it was Lighthawk that piloted our plane that we were given. And myself and Matt Sanchez and Alex Tyson, my 2 cameramen, we got in a small plane. I hate small planes. I never like to get in a small plane. I only get in a small plane when it's absolutely 100% necessary. I've done it twice. Once was in the Gulf, and the other time was reporting on the High Park fire in Colorado. But that footage was cut from the movie. Don't even need to do that. But in the Gulf of Mexico, I had a vision that I needed to somehow be on that plane. Something was going to happen to me flying over the Gulf. And sure enough, when we were told that we could not fly our planes below 3,500 feet. 3,500 feet or 3,000 feet, something like that, was the level at which you had to stay. Well, guess what? At 3,000 feet, you can't see anything. 3,000 feet is really far. Try to see something over there that's 3,000 feet away. You probably can't do it. So when you're up that high, you know, and when people would call, journalists would call the FAA, and this was reported in the New Orleans Picayune, when people would call the FAA to get a flight cleared to fly over the Gulf during the spill, BP would answer the phone when they were calling the FAA. And BP would say, sorry, you can't have clearance for this flight. So, okay, here's what happened. I'm in the car, it's the 3rd of July, and Alex Tyson, and I don't want to go on this flight. I had arranged for a boat. and Alex Tyson's on the phone and goes, what? Are you kidding? Really? Turns out we got clearance to fly under 3,000 feet. The people who were booking this whole procedure could not believe it. They said, you must have an angel on your shoulder. I said, oh my God, we have to get on this plane. Damn. So if you see the beginning of Gasland 2, you can watch us literally swooping through the clouds of the burn-off of the oil and gas that's coming out of the Deepwater Horizon rig in the Macondo oil fields, which you should call it by the ironic Gabriel Garcia Marquez name. And what I saw there was oil that covered the surface of the Gulf for 50 miles. And it was also apparent that these pictures were not on television, that these had not been brought out to the world. When we got off of that plane, you can see the footage in the film Gasland Part 2. We couldn't speak for hours. And meeting with Kendra Arneson, a local wife of a fisherwoman, if you will, and keeping tabs with her over the years, saying the Gulf has not recovered from oil. Meeting oyster farmers who said their oyster catch is down 90%, they're looking for a new job at age 56, going back to school. Meeting and talking with Wilma Subra, the great, amazing MacArthur Genius Award-winning scientist in Louisiana, talking about the contamination from Hurricanes Katrina and Rita that washed up on the shore. And then, of course, all that contamination in the Gulf of Mexico and how they were sinking the oil with dispersants, with chemical dispersants. There is no greater crime than I could imagine than what BP did in the Gulf. It's simply, I watched 9/11. I was down in the I mean, not to say that this is a comparison of catastrophes, but the BP oil spill was the worst thing I've ever seen. To me to try to return here as much as possible to work with communities that are on the ground that are fighting. Obviously, I think we have to do a better job of reaching out to, especially communities in the inner city, to get them in the door here. Hopefully, that we make sure that this community is the most suffering city in terms of all of these effects, from extreme weather to the offshore drilling in the Gulf to sea level rise, which threatens to overtake this city and not long from now. I mean, New Orleans is the most vulnerable city, probably paired with Miami, to climate change for all of these different aspects. So there must be some kind of streets, I think, to get to the communities that are most imperiled. And hopefully that's something that we can continue to talk about. And how do we figure out how to establish that? And that's why I want to go. But I'll say this. When you're working on climate change, it's extraordinarily upsetting, sobering, difficult, angering to see all the communities that are imperiled. And we know that communities of color and communities of poverty are much more vulnerable to climate change, which is also true in terms of coal and gas and oil development. But that we have to do a job of redefining our in the United States and worldwide is based on greed and competition and violence. If greed, competition, and violence are the value structure that we catastrophe on the face of the earth. In this city, when people were drowning and they tried to march out of their drowned neighborhoods across that bridge and faced, that is not a climate change problem. That is a collapse problem. And if we are going to survive the coming calamities, which many of which are impossible to avoid, we have to have a conversation about values. We have to have a conversation about race. We have to have a conversation about poverty. We have to have a conversation about human rights and democracy. These are the things that climate can't change. That's what the movie is about. And these are the things that are going to move us forward. And I think that that's one of the things that binds all of us together, as you talk about how we can't be in our individual silos of coal or gas or this. And as Maria Gano, the great Goldman Prize winning activist in West Virginia, said to me, keep doing what you're doing because if the coal doesn't get us, the gas will. Well, you could say that about a lot of different things, right? And that means that we have connections in all of the things that we're doing that are not just about fossil fuels, but also about all the movements that are propelling America, that are where the true seat of power is in the United States. I'm talking about the climate change movement. I'm talking about the anti-fracking movement, the movement against mountaintop removal. I'm also talking about Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about Occupy. I'm talking about the resurgence of feminism in America. These are movements that have a seat of power. And those are the things that we have to start talking about. How do these things interrelate? How do they connect? So I'm really happy in New York City. I'm going to pass the mic to her and just say thank you so much for everything.
First, I have to personally give Josh a hand again and thank him so much for that I am here says as much about him as it does about me. When you see the movie, How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things That Climate maybe, was that as you look at that, you see in each community, it didn't matter whether you were in China, or whether you were in Somalia, or whether you were in France, wherever you were, there was a common thread. And the common thread was most of these communities were poor. Many of them were communities of color. A preponderance of them were not viewed as voters or viewed whose lives were significant, because if your life is viewed as significant, you're not going to have a power plant or toxic fuel dumped next to you, because the protests and the uproar would be so loud, it just would not happen. And I didn't even realize the common threads, because when you're in your silo, and my silo is Rockaways, and my silo also was Pensacola, Florida, where I grew up, you only see what is around you. And when you work in communities of color and communities of poverty, you don't often get a chance to connect the dots, because those Greenpeace people have the time to get on the boat and go protect time to do this, whereas you're trying to make sure you get shoes for your kids, and you're trying to make sure they get educated when they're the last ones to get leftover books when they're coming out in their cycle. And when you're fighting with Black Lives Matter, you don't always see the dots connected. When you look at this film, it's a tapestry of those dots connecting. And I can so relate to what you said, because I believe that we are one body. working together. Beautiful quilt of life that we try and muster. Well, as you said, that water connects all of us. It connects all of us. It doesn't matter what orientation you have. It doesn't matter what you are and how much money you have in the bank. We all love our children. We all want to be loved. We all need to be loved. And I think when we started those common threads, then the dots start to connect. I clapped again for Josh because, to me, someone in his age who has done so much for so many, with so little, and built it into something that has truly changed lives, say, well done, I've done what I need to do, and I can go off into the sunset and really live a life, because this is not living a life. Being on the road, doing this, meeting people, hearing stories, wanting to change lives, and just the sweet burden that it is, it's not. And here I am in this move, and he brings the Action Center in, and we start this dialogue about community, and we look at all of these common threads. We look at this, and I look in his face, and I know he's exhausted. I know I am too, but I'm like, Josh, you can't show this movie. You can't even ask me or other people to be a part of it and have screenings. And the only people we see in those rooms are white old men. I'm being frank with you. Because your movie shows one thing, and now it has evolved into the next level. And it can't just be, because I can get black faces in the audience, but it can't just be token black. When we show a photo, it's beautiful because all of these hues are in here. Look at what we do. Voices, and it has to be real faces. You all realize it. We are all the same. And because it says you are so right, let's work on this together. Let's make sure when we look at these communities that we look for, I think he put it like this, other action centers. Because I knew there have to be other people who work with so little and do so much and don't raise their hands for the publicity and know will have that role and have accepted the challenge. And it's been a privilege for me, first, that he said yes, and second, to have met the people that I've met in New Orleans. I found so many action centers here. They consist of 1 or 2 people, but the action center was just 2 people when my husband and I started. When we cashed in our 401ks and said goodbye to corporations, and we became a corporation that changed lives and didn't get lives into debt and destruction and kill the planet and kill our children. Never been happier, never been poor, and never been happier. And we've done this for 15 years, and wouldn't do it any differently. But I met, and you're going to get to meet this evening, I met Burrell, who sees the community destroyed in Katrina. When we talk community, it's not just seeing the houses that are flipped over, or the cars that no longer run, or the vegetation growing through couches. But a community, and for a lot of communities where I come from, is the barber shop on the corner, next to the grocery store, we call them corner groceries, next to the wash and tear, we call them that in the South too, next to the little restaurant. And when those are destroyed, you destroy a community. And Burrell, I met today, I said, why are you doing this? It took his own money, his life savings. Because in the community where he was, this all got destroyed in one fell swoop. And there were no grocery stores, and so all you have is fried chicken. And you know what? If all you have is fried chicken, then that means your babies are going to die from high blood pressure and diabetes. It means that your grandmother, her life expectancy is going to be cut off by 5 more years. It means that typically in these communities, there's not a hospital. So your golden hour is not a golden hour, it's a golden minute. And so I said, Burrell, but what made you do this? And he said, because I served my country in the war, and I've served my country in Iraq, and I had to serve my neighborhood here, in my country. And he's going to get to meet today Beverly Johnson, or I always get her name wrong. I'm terrible with names, Davis. And in 2002, she lost her husband, she lost her mother, and she lost her brother. And as someone who lost my mother 6 years ago and who still goes into deep mourning, I can't even begin to imagine losing my husband and my brother as well. And the only thing that kept her here was her children. But when Katrina hit, a voice would not let her rest. It said, you must record this history. And she had been an artist years ago. Never picked up the brush again, because when you have children, that's why I was in the corporate world, you got to keep shoes on your feet. You got to feed them, and those little suckers eat a lot. You know, and so she said she heard starving artists too much, so she couldn't be an artist. But when Katrina hit and she saw all of this, and she saw children being separated from families, and folks being shot on the bridge, and other good folks, like the good folks that came to help us during Sandy, coming to help, and it wasn't being recorded, all of a sudden she could pick up a brush. She could paint this. She said she couldn't sleep at night. She kept saying, stop telling me to do this. And then she took the time to put little snippets in so that future generations who now Google everything can look at these lines and Google it and know the history and be concerned. And there's so many others that you will meet, people who are still on the Superfund site. A man who feels responsible for his wife's death because he thought he was doing something great for his family. But it was a community of color. Buy a house and a dream there for $60,000. There's a nightmare underneath. And I know what I'm talking about. I'm from Pensacola, Florida. 80% of my father's family is lost because we're one of the biggest Superfund sites ever. I gave 2 brushs to the Superfund, and I gave my mom to it on January 15, 2010. What climate change does, and believe me, before I met Josh and before we became a part of it, I never thought of these things as climate change. I thought of them as being, I can't say it, but being screwed, okay? And having to fight. I didn't connect the dots. I thank he and Lee and Julie and so many people who have helped me connect the dots because we just had to do what we had to do. And I'm a woman of choices. I've been to 30 countries. I mean, you know, I had a choice to leave when Sandy hit, being honest. So even my experience is different from the people that I work with. But I had not connected the dots. And we've been fighting climate change in Pensacola. When all this fog, and you're seeing all this pollution, and do you know in February, Pensacola, Florida had 2 devastating tornadoes? That's not the Midwest. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I had my first earthquake in New York and not Japan, where my daughter lives. I didn't even know it was an earthquake, and she happened to be visiting home, and she says, Mom, that's an earthquake. And I said, you're kidding me, that's funny, ha. And it wasn't funny, and it was true. That's climate change. What's been done over there for 40 years has made what's happening here different, and the coastlines are disappearing there. They're disappearing in Pensacola, they're disappearing in New Orleans, they're disappearing in Miami, they're disappearing so many ways. And so, you know, I'll round this up because we are all connected. And if we don't understand as people that we are only as strong as the weakest of us, and we're as weak as the strongest of us, we deserve what we get. And we're going to get what we deserve. Because he's so right, the earth will be fine. It's mankind and my grandchildren who are not born yet, and generations to come that we are concerned about. So I thank you all for having us here. I thank Josh for listening, for opening up, and for expanding the conversation, and for bringing it here. Because I say to myself, what good is it to gain the world? I think there's a book that says that. What good is it to gain the world and not have love? And I say this, what good would it be for me and for the Action Center, for Aria Doe, to have gained this wonderful platform of 51 million people, this wonderful director, you people in the room listening to my voice, and I will bring it back to the communities that need it. It's not enough for the Action Center to be there. It's not enough for me to have choices when other people don't have choices. It's not enough for me to have a voice and there to still be voiceless among us. And so I thank him, I thank you, I thank all of you, and I look forward to listening. Thank you.
going a little bit longer than we had planned. Does anyone have any questions and anything to share?
Hi, I don't have any questions. I just have to say, I want to thank everyone up there for making it simple, ABC, because words like fracking and, I just didn't understand it before. But I understood every single thing you said, and I appreciate you.
Got a question for Paul. My brother-in-law, he's from West Virginia. And I just can't understand, excuse me, how these people can fight for the coal industry. And after generations have died, they still refuse to see the damage that you're talking about. I just don't see how they can be so ramped up and so blind to it. And I was wondering if you had any words on it.
Thank you.
I appreciate your courage to stand up and address that. And I get asked that a lot. If you don't mind, I think I have two parts to some response to that. The first part is, we're sort of like the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water. The heat has been turned up slowly, 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 and it's not until we're cooked that we're going to recognize what's happening to us. I was really fortunate that photography found me at 12 years of age and wouldn't let me go, and it became my ticket to the world. And having all of those amazing experiences really informed me about what was happening in my own backyard. I tell people often that it's ironic that I've covered human rights issues in so many corners of the world and come home to find my biggest challenge in my own backyard where I grew up. And watching both of my parents slowly dying from the poisons around them and understanding, National Geographic did a story a couple of years ago in West Virginia, and the coal fields was one of the shortest life expectancies of any demographic in the entire United States by over 10 years. And the reason is coal toxins. And there's 28 peer-reviewed studies to attest to that our government continues to deny. But those numbers, they're just little dots on papers. If you print those reports out, it's a big thick stack of numbers and letters, and it's all abstract. And it's ironic, but let me quote Joseph Stalin, who was quoted as saying, "The death of one is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic." But for yourself and for me and my family, and watching my parents slowly fade away way too young, those aren't just statistics on a page, they're very real to us. And those things are very real in all the other places I've seen as well. The second part of that is, I think if you look at what's happened in southern West Virginia, in particular in the coal fields, one could readily understand that it's probably the largest mass case study of Stockholm Syndrome that we've seen maybe in this nation. These are people who have come to believe that their captor is their savior. And, I've seen that in my own family. I know that my dad was a very proud coal miner, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm proud of my dad. I'll tell you, I've never met a finer man in my entire life than my dad, and I hope someday I'll be as fine a person as he is. He is a kind, strong, amazing human being. And, the interesting thing, he never fought me when I started fighting coal. He never fought me. He just listened. There's one of the photos in the slideshow of this, of a young woman pinned down by 5 state police officers with a knee in her throat because she dared to ask the governor to stand good on his promises to protect some children that lived underneath a slurry impoundment. And I showed him what coal was doing and how it had taken our government away from us. That was the day that he woke up. And he's no longer, thankfully, among those in that camp that believes that coal is our savior, and he understands now everything that's being taken from us. It's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's what I think. If I could say it in 2 words, Stockholm Syndrome.
And it's the same here in Louisiana. People think the energy industry here is what saved Louisiana. It's like, I was talking to Josh and Lee earlier. We are at the bottom of every good list. We are no longer is fun to eat them because I'm worried the whole time that maybe what I'm ingesting is killing me. I've already had thyroid cancer. My whole family has had cancer. I can name a person in my family with just about every cancer you can identify. And like I said, I'm a lifelong resident here. I've always eaten seafood and lived here. But people here, if you talk to them, most of the people here, they're like, well, the energy industry is good for Louisiana. How is it good for Louisiana? Where has it been good? They don't pay taxes, they don't fix things that they destroy, and they don't clean up their pollution. How have they been good? A few jobs? I don't think it's a good trade-off.
I just have one quick question. Education is what's so important. Louisiana, of course, is number 1 and number 2 in natural gas and gas production. But throughout the country, we get very accustomed to everything we use. So, as far as renewable energy, it has to be a focus for our future. I don't know, but how effective is nuclear energy? And besides the windmills and nuclear, what are some of the other ways to bring renewable energy into the picture?
Well, nuclear energy is not a renewable energy source. And the problem with nuclear energy is simple. You can't build a nuclear power plant that will be both efficient and profitable and withstand every contingency that could possibly happen at a nuclear power plant. So statistically, you're going to have 90 out of 100 or 99 out of 100 of those nuclear power plants are going to be fine, and you'll have one Fukushima, right? Or you'll have one Chernobyl. So you don't want to mess with that, because at that point, it's the risk is not worth the reward as an industry on the whole. The good news is that wind, water, and sun can get us to to 100% of our power needs. I'm not just talking electricity, but I'm talking in all sectors, okay? And I would add to that, of course, conservation. So the truth about nuclear is it's too dangerous and you simply don't need it. The other anecdotal piece of information about nuclear is right now we are in a very, very scary situation with respect to nuclear energy and sea level rise. It takes 20 to 30 years to decommission a nuclear power plant. The stuff is that hot, it's that radioactive, it's hard to move. There's a lot of reasons why it takes a long process to move that stuff. So any of them that are in anywhere near that red zone, when you're talking about the 5 to 9 meters of sea level rise that we know is going to happen, and could happen in the next 30 years, those things have to be closed and moved now, right now. So we can't think about, because most of them are near water also because of the cooling and all the things that need to happen. Okay, so those things need to be closed down and moved right now. That's what it means to say, okay, there are certain aspects of the climate crisis that we're not going to be able to solve. And that's the bottom line. Conversely, however, you take a look at offshore wind power. There was a study that was just done out of Stanford. If you put a certain number of wind power, and the two case studies were Sandy and Katrina in New York and in New Orleans. If you put 70,000 wind turbines that ringed New Orleans, you would minimize 70% of the storm surge from something like Katrina. Now that's amazing. That's a win-win, because those wind turbines end up paying for themselves. And you also have just powered, the 3 states all around the area. Now you say, well, 70,000 wind turbines, that's insane. That's an enormous amount of wind turbines. Well, how many offshore rigs are there in the Gulf right now?
Yeah.
50,000? 50,000 offshore wells, something like that? So it's not inconceivable. There are solutions. And if myself and Mark Ruffalo, a wonderful actor who I work a lot with on fracking, and he plays the Hulk in the Avengers, the Green Superhero, and Mark Jacobson from Stanford University, and a bunch of other California renewable energy bankers, started something called the Solutions Project. The Solutions Project created plans for over 50 states of how each state would go 100% renewable. Okay. I also founded something called Solutions Grassroots, where we went out on the road to give those energy solutions to communities, and that's part of what we're talking about here. Now, there is no way forward for New Orleans, or New York City for that matter, if we continue to develop fossil fuels. It's just not possible. We've warmed the climate by 1 degree Celsius. We already have enough CO2 and methane in the atmosphere right now to bring us to 1.5 degrees, because even if we turn everything off now, the Earth would continue to warm based on what's already up there by another 0.5. So we're already, in an intensive person, at 1.5 degrees. Okay, at 2 degrees of sea level, 2 degrees warming Celsius, sea levels rise between 5 and 9 meters. If the sea level rises in this area by 3 feet, this city goes underwater. Same is true for a lot of Miami. It's already happening in Miami Beach. So you're talking about massive seawalls here, probably, and the offshore wind. Now we're even talking about the extreme extreme weather events. Okay, there is so much that needs to be done to save New Orleans and New York City, and it's quite possible that that won't happen. In fact, it's probable that that won't happen. So we're facing really grim realities, and that's not just for New Orleans and New York City, that's for Boston, for Providence, for Charleston, for Miami, for Washington, D.C., for San Francisco, for all the major coastal cities of the world, of which most cities are, Shanghai, Manila, Jakarta. Can we do renewable energy? Yes, we know the answer to that. We're there. It's quite simply this. If we continue to develop fossil fuels, there is no chance of the way of life that we live in the United States of America surviving. You can't imagine what would happen if the coastal cities of the United States have to move. Where are those people going to go? And what food are they eating? And if we don't plan ahead, how much of that contamination that washed onshore with Katrina is now going into the ocean because of all the hundreds of thousands or millions of oil and gas refining sites, gas stations? It takes $700,000 to $800,000 to move one single gas station because those tanks are under the ground. You're going to move them all along the entire East Coast. So we can't be Pollyannish about what's on the way. We also have to say that there is absolutely no way. That's why the film's called How to Let Go of the World. There is absolutely no way we get through that calamity if we see a repeat on every street corner of what happened here during Katrina. If we see the federal government continue to favor some populations of certain races and certain economic profile over others, simply the fabric of the United States starts to fall apart and tear in front of your face. So the truth is, we must not only deploy renewable energy, but we have to understand that unless we do that in a way that's more democratic, in a way that we do that where distributed power, not just electric power, but power, people power of citizens, those things have to go together if we're going to withstand what we know is on the way. So, I know the question was about nuclear, but the question is not, just about the source of power, but you have to factor into that all these other things that are happening in the same way that you can't build a contingency out of nuclear. You can't build contingencies that allow us to use fossil fuels, if we want to continue to keep these things that are part of what makes America great. I love this city. As a New Yorker, I'm always enamored of what happens in New Orleans because it's such a fantastic and amazing place of music and culture, and the food is amazing, and people are fun here in ways that other cities are not, So to think that, that it wouldn't be here, and to think that New York wouldn't be here, it's a fundamentally different Earth, and that's true all over the globe. We are way too late to even be having a discussion about whether we're leasing the Gulf or creating new frac gas power plants or continuing with mountaintop removal. I mean, this is just like you're driving your car at 100 miles an hour straight into a brick wall with a foot to go. You're like, oh, maybe I should put my seatbelt on. So we've got to have a really serious discussion about how what the future is. The science is telling us what it looks like and where we have to go respectively, not just in terms of energy, but also in terms of how we deal with ourselves as a society. Another question?
Well, I want to mention too, just put during the ice ages when Chicago had the world's average temperature. So that's only 8 or 9 degrees, and we were already moving our temperature up the other way. So what's going to happen to the Earth with 8 or 9 degrees the other way? God knows.
Cameraman had a question. Is that a question?
Hey, Lucas. I also just quickly want to say, ironically, or not so ironically, it is the communities that have been the sacrifice zones of fossil fuel industry that are recognizing and really powering through the renewable energy options and standing for that. I know Kafir Mountain and other places. So we need to look to those who really have been hosts, unwilling hosts of this corporate monster to actually teach us a way out of it, because they're looking at the options and it's very clear. Very clear.
That's right.
All right. That's okay. I can. Well, maybe this is better. You can answer this with a yes or no, but it's a big question, and I struggle with this. I think a lot of us do. Is our problem more than just how we get our energy, or is our problem, we're looking at more than just climate change, mass extinction, so many other things that we can go into. But is it an indictment more of our way of life? And everything, as Naomi Klein says, is it everything?
Yes, the love of money is the root of all evil, and the love of money drives the energy sector.
My answer is yes.
Yes. What I think what Janet said is very powerful. The relief and efforts and the reimagining of communities has to be sourced within the communities themselves, right? So there is a wealth of knowledge out there about how to do this better, but it's not going to come, from outside of it's us that are on the front lines. That we have a lot to say about how this could get reorganized, and I think that's part of what we're talking about here today. And I think there's a wealth of knowledge there that has to be, put to bear on these questions. And absolutely, that's the backbone of all these movies, right? That's why people like to watch Gasland or like to watch the movie that we're showing now. It's because the folks who are on the front lines really, really know what they're talking about, And I think that in many ways, there is a value structure that you can see in the indigenous world that is mirrored in a lot of the conversation of people who are involved in those frontline communities, right? When you start talking about sustainability in New York City, it's because something taught you a lesson.
Yeah.
And then that is why the conversation, I think, happens. And I say thank you to Mary Ellen for her song. Actually, the very first interview that I ever did about what I was doing with Gasland was in the Cooteray Reservation with Al Baker. And I think I may have met you that day. On the reservation where we went spearfishing that night. And he taught me all about how you won the court case again in the Supreme Court to be able to fish year-round as the indigenous people of that land. So, the truth is that these things are all interconnected, but that the value structure that is emerging is not new. It's old. It's older than what we call civilization, which is the last 10,000 years. And that's an important thing to recognize. I'm not suggesting we go back to pre-civilization because that would be absolute chaos. But what I am saying is, yes, these are all the problems, whether they're Flint, Michigan, and lead in the water, or police brutality in reaction to Occupy, or police brutality as a natural course of events in the United States of America, simply not saying natural, unnatural course of events, and having to do with racism in our society, or oil and gas. These are ways that we're living unconsciously, and those are increasingly inappropriate and meaningless. And a new sense of meaning has to be imbued in how we live, without a doubt. But I think it's about the communities themselves that are able to have to determine that for themselves. It can't come from an expert or a panel or anything. It has to come from inside the community.
Yeah, no, I can't say, when I can't say something better, I'm not gonna try and repeat it. I can't say anything any better than what everybody said here, and I totally agree. We need to reimagine the world, and we need to reimagine it in a way that makes sense. Because right now we all look at the world like actors are more valued than policemen, you know, or that you know, some official who's a billionaire that came to their family from some other kind of way is more important than a child on the street that we have who's facing their full potential. But we also need to reimagine this movement as well. It can't be, as Josh said, folks coming outside and going into a community and telling them what they need. Folks like us here at the table have to be valued in some ways more, because you've been on the front line, you know what the community needs, you listen to the heartbeat of the community, and the community listens to you. And that's where change happens. So community needs to be a budget item as much as anything else.
It's a dialogue.
Yes, it's a dialogue.
In line with what we've been talking about this renewed sense of inclusiveness and about how the change needs to start inside the communities, you've traveled all over the country in different communities, and I guess what my question is what do you see would be the most effective vehicle for those kinds of changes in New Orleans?
I couldn't answer that so well for myself. I just know that the movement teaches you what you need to do next, right? So it's not like, oh, you picture a goal so far away, but it's showing up at a meeting like this where you might meet and connect with people, or showing up at your local meeting. Like, that's what happened to me, right? So in working on fracking is showing up at the community meeting and then making a connection to what my next step was. You know, someone in the Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, the small 5-person anti-fracking group in my neighborhood, said, go to Dimmock. I was like, what's Dimmock? Dimmock, Pennsylvania. That's where they're doing all this drilling. Go there. I was like, okay, do you know anybody there? And they're like, well, I have one phone number. So I call that one phone number, and then I get invited. And that person knows 5 to 10 people there, so I'm shooting, okay? So I do 3 weeks in the town and get to know everybody. And now I've known those people for nearly a decade. You know, and we're a family, we're a community, and that's true of all these different places, right? So it's like, the first step is always, the easy step is the best one for each person individually. How he said that, though, I know that I was in the Lower Ninth Ward at the community center that was there. What was the name of that place that, in 2010, that I visited? That place was packed, you know what I mean? And it was so clearly an effort that was happening here in New Orleans. And I'm wondering, you know, I'd have to look it up. I'm sorry, because I've just been so many places. What's that? I'm sorry. I really would have to. I could probably remember, but I'm wondering. Okay, so how do we connect that, which was a relief center, and in many ways playing the same role that the Action Center was playing? What our job is now. How do we take those people in the Action Center and the Rockaways, and then bring them into the climate change conversation, which is often a privileged white conversation about environmentalism. You know what I'm saying? So how do we do that? Well, we go and we show the film, and then we start to continue that dialogue, and then figure out can we bring the solar companies into the Rockaways and say this is how you got to do that, and then that's the kind of thing that the governor gets scared of, right? Because if the people in the Rockaways are going to revolt, they're the symbol of Hurricane Sandy. He was out there. Oh, we got to reject this natural gas terminal. This is how it adds up, right? But it is a lot of work. And but it is also about just taking the first step, and the movement teaches you how to get there. I feel very lucky to be able to make films about it. Obviously, that's a very privileged position. At the same time, you know, we would be doing this even if we weren't making films about it, because our lives depend on it.
Locally, it's the same, and Paul has the same thing where he is, and all of us do. You've got the buy-in that energy, for example, is necessary here. get people out Wednesday at the Superdome. Be there Wednesday morning. Help us surround the dome with thousands of people. That would be a statement that the media and the governor and the legislature couldn't ignore, you know. But, you know, if we have a handful of people show up and we don't have that great support, they can just write us off as a few loonies who don't really matter, you know. And, you know, Energy's over there buying mall meals and at Antoine's.